Welcome to the discussion. My guest today is Dan Karianis, the Director of Public Sector at RSA Archer. Dan, welcome to the discussion.
Jason, thanks very much. Good to hear your voice, and hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving.
Thank you. It's always good to take a couple days off. Let me set just a little bit of context for our discussion. Without a doubt, 2020 will be remembered in the federal sector as the year of the supply chain risk management. Oh yeah, there's that coronavirus pandemic too, turned everyone world upside down. But when we step back from this tragedy, let's look at how much attention and resources went to supply chain risk management over the last 12 months. From the Defense Department's somewhat challenging rollout of the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC, to the launch of the Federal Acquisition Security Council, to the second part of the Section 889 acquisition rule, at every turn, agencies and vendors face new requirements. The task is so great that the Office of the Director of National Intelligence outlined 3 broad goals to improve the security of the federal supply chain. These include implementing enhanced capabilities to detect and respond to supply chain threats, and to do more outreach with public and private sector partners about potential and real vulnerabilities. Nearly every agency from ODNI to the FBI to DHS to the Commerce Department is involved in protecting the federal supply chain. And agencies need to take all this data, both from public and private sector sources, and apply it to their specific mission areas. And that's where my guest comes in to tell us how best to do that. Once again, my guest is Dan Karianis, the Director of Public Sector at RSA Archer. Now, Dan, organizations have been working with technology companies, suppliers, contractors. This supply chain risk management thing is not new, but we've had a lot more focus on it over the last year and a half, 18 months or so. Why is all this focus kind of really bubbled to the top?
Well, it's an interesting area, and certainly an area of growing importance. With increased threats from nation states, cyber criminals, et cetera, they've been targeting government organizations for years. They've also been targeting their contractors and their suppliers. In fact, many of the more recent breaches typically have come in those areas. So, you've got technology firms who are leveraging, parts from different manufacturers and a host of suppliers from around the globe. And so there's an ongoing and increasing concern about where do all these technology components come from, and are those technology suppliers, do they fully understand who's handling them? Think about the chain of custody, if you will. Is there the possibility of any malicious code being introduced into some of those technology components? You also have the contractor community who is being leveraged by the government to support their initiatives, support their programs. And so there's this ongoing operational need that agencies have to be secure on an ongoing basis and employ best practices, not only within their own environment, but also within their contractor community, their supplier community as well. So kind of in short, the way I look at this, the way we look at this, is the risk footprint that an agency has expanded significantly, and the importance based on a lot of the nation state cyber criminals that are out there about making sure that everybody in that expanded risk footprint is doing the best they can to control those environments, secure those environments. So we think of it as an expanded risk ecosystem, and that's one of the things that RSA Archer has been doing to help government organizations, as well as the DIB and the commercial organizations as well, deal with that.
I think that's a great way to put it, expanded risk footprint. This is not a new expansion. I mean, if you think about over the last 20, 25 years, the government has really relied on vendors much more. What changed is, I think, the technology and the global supply chain. You brought that up in an earlier part of our conversation just a minute ago around how there's a host of suppliers around the globe where that tech is being developed comes from. Is that why do you think it's really, again, I'll go back to what I said earlier, bubble up to the top, just because there's a confluence of issues that are now coming together that has created a wake-up call in many ways?
Yeah, I think a wake-up call for sure. A great way to think about it. You highlighted earlier the DoD CMMC initiative. I mean, if you think about that, for a while the government has pushed more of a voluntary initiative by contractor community, the defense industrial base and others, to adhere to government guidelines, but there was never any punitive or enforced initiative around that. CMMC really is driving more of this across the government community in general, all the contractors and the product suppliers that are out there, mandating that they have certain controls and practices in place to ensure to take the level of security up, because again, that expanded footprint, that ecosystem, if you think about the ripple effect of not just the prime contractor, but all their subcontractors, yeah, I think the government is pushing hard. DOD's initiative is pushing hard to get more people to really understand the risk as well as the opportunity, if you will, to shore up security up and down the line.
Now, Dan, we could spend probably the entire show talking about CMMC, but since this is much bigger than just that one program, let me just ask you about CMMC. How much does that come up when you talk to your partners, your clients in the government world? Is that the talk of the town? Because I can tell you, every story we write, it gets huge numbers, and we know there's a lot of focus on it.
Absolutely, it comes up all the time. As you noted in my title, I mean, I'm responsible for our government business from an RSA Archer perspective, but that bleeds into the contractor community as well. This topic comes up not only with the government organizations that we talk to, by the way, not just DOD, but civilian. There are many civilian agencies that are looking hard at this and what this is about and what this might mean and what this might set up for them to potentially do as well. But also across the contractor community, it comes up all the time. We, in fact, have actually, with our compliance solution set that we have, we've actually modified it with all the CMMC practices, as well as all the NIST 800-171 controls embedded within it to help contractor organizations take themselves through a process and ensure they're meeting those guidelines, those controls, those practices. And we have had several folks who have licensed that and put that into use. So it's real, and it comes up all the time.
Yeah, I imagine it does because of the concern. What will it mean? And now with civilian agencies, and you see this at the General Services Administration as just one example, starting to put it as a piece of the contract, in the scope of the contract, as they say it. The other piece to this discussion that I want to go down the path around supply chain is the pandemic. I mentioned how 2020 is the year of supply chain risk management. That was a little, facetious there, because I realize everything has really been driven by the pandemic, but that's also changed the way the agencies look at their supply chains, and it's impacted the supply chains too. How has the pandemic really impacted the way agencies can get the technology, the supplies, the services they need?
Well, if you think about it, the pandemic, in many cases, has caused agencies to modify their thinking about remote workforce, just as a simple example, as well as their contractor community. I've had, legions of employees as well as contractors coming to my buildings, my facilities on an ongoing basis. Now I have had to, as a result of pandemic, accommodate all of them working from home and doing that securely. So, from an RSA perspective, it's, how do we help organizations, allow entities and employees to remote in securely and to perform their ongoing mission without any impact, to the general public that they serve or the mission that they support. How do they do that securely? So I think the pandemic has really opened people's eyes to how organizations can operate in a more flexible virtual environment, but also understanding the risks around that, and therefore needing to put new security controls, processes, procedures, privacy standards in place to make sure that they're doing that in a proper fashion. So I think the pandemic has really caused people to rethink things. And I also think once we get through all this, it's probably modifying the way agencies think about how they're going to do business in the future. I think they'll probably rethink and have more flexibility around contractors and employees working remote. And that in turn, I think will also cause agencies to have to beef up the way they address security across their enterprise because that risk footprint, again, increases.
I was just about to say that the risk footprint is what's changed in such a huge way, because now it used to be, well, 80% or 90% of my workforce is in the office. I can kind of keep them in a controlled environment. But now with everyone working from home, and who knows what their home setup looks like, and you can only lock down the laptop so much. From your perspective, is that's probably the biggest change is that risk footprint. But agencies seem to also have adjusted with a sense of urgency that maybe we haven't seen in the past to that new risk footprint. Would you say that that's true?
Yeah, I would. I think that, some agencies were already down the path. I know we at RSA Archer, with our customers, we've talked to many of them over the course of, literally almost the last year now. And some of them were probably more prepared, set up for this. Their continuity of operations, or a new word I'd like to introduce, or we talk about quite a bit, about operational resiliency within their organization. Many of them were somewhat prepared to deal with this. Others were not, and had to hustle, if you will, had to really quickly put processes and procedures in place to, again, support the general public as well as the missions. But yes, absolutely. I think that this has really forced people to kind of rethink and rebalance how their mission and how they go about business on a daily basis.
We hear a lot of buzzwords that pop up over the last 6 or 9 months around like zero trust and identity and access management, things that were always out there, but now the pandemic has given it, if you will, a kick in the butt to really get going. At the same time, do you think supply chain also falls in there? Are agencies paying maybe more attention today around supply chain risks than they were, a year ago, 2 years ago, because of the pandemic, or what did the pandemic drive around supply chain risk?
Well, we have for years been supporting agencies as well as the contractor community in automating the way they manage their supply chain. Anything from just simply putting in place an application to track their supplier community, a supply catalog, if you will, supplier catalog. Not just the individual organizations, but maybe contracts they might have in place, or the technologies they acquire from them, et cetera, all those types of things. I think what the pandemic really did was it caused people to reflect in a very quick way, not just on themselves, but understanding the reliance they had on their contractors, their suppliers. It forced them to reevaluate and think through, again, this idea of operational resiliency. How do I ensure that I am continuing business as usual? I don't have to be completely down and out before I implement a COOP plan. I am operationally resilient. I'm up, I'm running, I'm continuing to provide products, services, what have you, to the public or to my employees on an ongoing basis. And I think that this has caused the contractor community as well to have to think about zero trust. It has caused the contractor community to think about how they deal with the fact that, they are such an integral part of an organization and agency's enterprise, and therefore part of the risk posture of that agency. How, in fact, do they help enhance that by implementing best practices within their own architectures, security architectures, as well as within their enterprise.
Dan, on that note, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we can continue our conversation about supply chain risk. You're listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Network.